So they must be able to participate in the curriculum, even if they're in another setting. They must be able to continue to work towards their IEP goals and receive the services, supports, and accommodations that are called for in the IEP. And this is interesting because one of the other provisions about the IAES is they're being put there because there was a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So it really is expected that the setting is going to work towards correcting the problem. Now, have any of you ever had to write a behavior plan for a kid who brings a weapon to school? What's the behavior plan for a kid who brings a weapon to school? Don't bring a weapon to school. Yeah. I mean, now, here's what I would say though, because I had a situation last year where we did this, and it really actually worked very well. We worked with the team to find out why this kid felt compelled to bring a weapon. And what we found out was that even though this kid talked a good game, he felt he was being bullied. In his mind, he perceived the environment as bullying him, and he was scared. Now, he didn't articulate it real well. But once we really dug in, we found out that was what was going on. And it was his perception. It wasn't what anyone else saw. So we built a plan to put in place a place where he could go and someone he could talk to of his choosing, rather than feeling like he had to protect himself by bringing a weapon. We also searched him every day to make sure he didn't bring a weapon. But I mean, hey, look, we're going to take every precaution. And there are schools now that have metal detectors at the doors.
Oh, many.
So, I mean,
Go to DC.
But I mean, there are ways that you can build effective plans around even those low-frequency, high-intensity behaviors, right? Okay, so what are some examples of potential violations? Things that you can get in trouble for. Suspending a student without notification. So if you don't notify the parent, and I'm going to tell you guys that are administrators in here, you want to make sure that you have communicated it fully and that they actually say, I got it, whether it's a note, a phone call, whatever. You want to ensure that they have it in their possession. Because if you leave a message on the answering machine, if you send a note home with the student, there is no assurance it's going to get there. And it's really your responsibility to make sure it gets there. You cannot suspend a kid indefinitely. You come back when we decide you can come back, kind of thing. That doesn't work so well. And notice it says serially. In other words, where you establish a pattern. Remember the one I was telling you about where every other Friday? Okay, that is a violation. That is a procedural violation. Changing placement without using the mechanism of IDEA. What's the mechanism for changing placement?
IEP meeting.
IEP meeting, very good. What happens if parents don't agree with the IEP?
You can't change it. You can do
Okay,
it.
so first of all, before we invoke stay put, you provide what? Prior written notice. Very good. Prior written notice. How many of you have heard of prior written notice? Very good. Obviously, y'all are well trained. Excellent. Okay, so prior written notice. Then, while you are settling the disagreement, the student stays where?
Present level.
Stay put. How many of you have heard of stay put? Okay, is stay put a short-term or long-term provision? No, not hopefully. Well, Rita, it can be both, but it's not supposed to be both. It is a short-term provision. It was designed to allow schools and parents to come to some agreement to move forward. What's happened?
Yes, so time is not defined.
That time is not defined, and so as a result, stay put is becoming what?
A placement.
Long term. I had a situation last year where I've got a kid whose parents refused to sign the IEP in 5th grade. He's now in 7th grade. that IEP is still sitting there, and you can't, see what schools try to do is they try to write addendums.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You have to settle the dispute, then you move forward. And this is and here's the thing. The people that are fighting are not the people who are suffering. The kid is the one who's suffering.
Yeah. Yep.
Because they're only being able to serve them up to what that 5th grade IEP called for. And they're fighting over something that is really, it all stemmed from an accommodation that was put in the IEP that had really no data to support, and there was no plan to decrease or thin that support. You know what I mean by that, right?
Yeah.
When you put an accommodation in an IEP, whatever that is, I don't care what it is, I want you to promise me that your next discussion will be around how do we begin to thin this out so that kids can move back towards what everyone else does. They may not ever get there, but I mean the idea of, for example, extended time. I walk into high school classes now where a teacher gives an assignment and I see a group of kids sitting back there talking. And I'll say, "You're not doing your work." And then I get extended time. Really?
To work.
I teach over at ODU. Most of you, I think, know that. We have an Office of Educational Accessibility, which basically serves students with disabilities. And they don't have IEPs, but they get accommodations to support them in the learning environment. And a lot of times I get students who come to my class and they'll have on their letter, accommodations letter, it says extended time or shortened lesson. And so I publish a planner before every semester that tells you everything you need to do day by day. And the students will come up to me and say, "Well, how much time do I get to turn in the first assignment?" I said 3 weeks. And they said, "But that's when it's due." I said, "That's your extended time." Don't you get it? You don't get 3 more weeks. Extended time was really, you know what extended time was really designed for? Does anybody know?
Testing.
It was for in-class things that kids didn't have time to finish.
Right.
It wasn't for things that you got planned out 6 weeks from now. And for testing, because a lot of kids have problems processing and testing. But it's like how many of you are parents? How did you know when it was time to potty train your kid? When they walked up and handed you a diaper, right? So when a kid can tell you their accommodations and they're sitting there, having a good old time, and they go, "Hold on, I'll get to that in a minute because I get extended time."
It's a crutch. Yeah, it can't be a crutch. Yeah.
Failing to conduct a manifestation. When a child, when a young, either a young adult, child, whatever you want to call them, I call everybody kids, so don't get offended. Y'all are mostly kids to me too, because I'm old. But when a student is suspended and we fail to do a manifestation, or we do not conduct the manifestation consistent with the requirements, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, that is a violation. And then finally, failing to conduct an FBA or develop a plan when the behavior is a manifestation. If it's determined that the student's behavior is a manifestation of their disability, you must conduct a functional assessment and develop a behavior plan. Because at that point, you cannot discipline them in the same manner as everyone else. And that's where I think a lot of administrators, that's what they hear, and that's what they think applies all the time. It doesn't apply across the board. It's only under those conditions. Okay? Questions? Good? Good. Okay, these are substantive. And when we talk about procedural, it's what we do. Substantive is what's in the plan. Failing to address behavior in the IEP. If you check that box that that kid has behavior problems that interfere with their learning or the learning of others, you have to have something in that IEP that's addressing that. All right? Second, conducting an FBA that does not address function. All right, the F in FBA is function. Okay? The whole purpose of the FBA is to try and tease out function, guys. So if you're sitting around and you do whatever you do, and you say, okay, well, in our FBA we couldn't identify function, then you didn't do an FBA. Now, there are people who confuse us because they have so many things going on. And there are kids who have multiple functions. I mean, under different conditions. Like, I work with kids who call out answers, okay? In one class, they call out answers because they know the answer. In another class, they call out answers because they don't know the answer. And in both cases, the function is kind of the same. Where they know the answer, they're trying to what? Get attention. Where they don't know the answer, they're trying to what? Get out. So it's the same behavior, but it serves a different function under different conditions. So those are hard plans to write because you can't write a one-size-fit-all BIP, which you shouldn't anyway. Do y'all call them BIPS or BAPS? BIPS. That's what we call them. But I was recently talking with someone who called it a BAP, a behavior assistance plan. So I asked him, I said, well, are you using a functional assessment to develop them? And they said no. I said, well, that's why they're calling them BAPS. Developing an intervention plan that is entirely reactive. Okay, so in other words, we recognize that there's going to be a certain amount of reaction that needs to be present. But what we want to try and do is build plans that are also what?
Proactive.
Proactive, preventive if possible. Can we prevent every behavior problem? No, we can't predict everyone. But the ones that we know, it's probably a good idea to think about what can we do to try and prevent it. I often find it interesting that sometimes it's really so simple that even people who wrote Hee-Haw figured it out, didn't they? Remember Hee-Haw?
Yes.
Doc, it hurts when I do this. Then don't do that, right? So, if you know something is going to go wrong, then maybe we ought not do that, right? Failing to provide faith. Okay, here we go. For the first time in 2004, the term expulsion appeared in special ed law. And that was a scary moment when we saw that. Why? What does expulsion mean? It means you can't come back. In Gen Ed, they're not allowed on grounds. They have no services, right? Is that what happens in special ed?
No.
What does expulsion mean in special ed? Could be, it's a change of placement, generally to a more restrictive setting. Not always, but generally. So expulsion in special ed does not mean expulsion. And so when you see that word, Gen Ed administrators especially, I know how you guys understand expulsion, what it is. It's not the same thing. This is again one of the confusions that have come about. I always tell people, again, you guys that are in special ed and have been around a while, you probably remember back in the day when you would write IEPs. Do you remember when you would write IEPs and it would have grade, you'd put UG in that box? Ungraded, right? Because it was all about placement, right? It wasn't grade levels. And now we go by grade, we go by age, we do all these things. And so we've got some confusions there, but there are still very distinct provisions that govern special education. Everybody okay with the substantive violations? They're called violations because you're not supposed to do them, okay? So make sure you make a note of it. All right. I have, in your email, we asked you guys to please bring your activities with you. If you didn't, I put them on the screen. They're a little small if you're in the back, but these are the actual questions. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you the question. You tell me what you think. When a parent consents to the initial provision of some, but not all, of the proposed special ed and related services, do the discipline provisions apply if a child violates the school's code of student conduct? Yes or no? You would say yes. Okay, this is where we'll do some choral responding. You think yes,